brutal. The nuclear end is already very close. The war is moving into a completely different dimension. Russia and the West are already ready to do this. Revenge for the web means nuclear strikes on Kyiv and Odesa. What is truly frightening? It's the fact that the Doomsday Radio, which had been silent for years, has started working. Russia is losing unique weaponry at the front, while Ukrainian engineers have invented interceptor drones that have shocked everyone. Trump is back in the game. The US is preparing a sanctions knockout. The Kremlin's economy is under threat. Russia is suffering massive losses in Sumy, and the situation inside Russia is terrifying. Veterans of the special military operation are unfit for civilian life and are causing utter horror. The war is entering a new nuclear phase. Putin is preparing a terrifying scenario, a strike on Kyiv or Odesa. The Western press is already sounding the alarm. The Kremlin might go all in, counting on the world to remain silent. This is revenge for the web and the Crimean bridge. Everything could escalate to the point of no return. NATO is already in a panic. It is increasing air defense in Europe fivefold. It sounds like science fiction, but all of this is reality. The Kremlin's plan may be more terrifying than it seems.
Just yesterday it was an important hub of resistance, but now it's nothing but a crater. The 225th Separate Assault Regiment in the Kursk region cleared and captured a Russian company's strongpoint, which was covering an important direction and was well prepared for all-around defense. After Ukraine's successful strikes on Russian aviation and the Crimean bridge, Russia didn't just react, it went berserk. For example, Medvedev is talking about some kind of retribution.
To everyone who is worried and waiting for retribution, it's normal to worry. That's a human trait. Retribution is inevitable.
The possibility of a retaliatory response was also mentioned in the US, suggesting that Russia might strike Ukraine using ballistic missiles, including the Oreshnik.
I'm sure that such a situation is possible because this person is mentally unstable. Honestly, yes. But I can say with confidence that, first of all, we will know in advance whether this Oreshnik will be launched or not. Because, thank God, our partners, the British and the Americans, are monitoring the entire territory of Russia around the clock with their satellites. And we receive timely information about the launches of any missiles that are launched from the territory of the Russian Federation.
Although there are also scenarios where Russia might simply launch another swarm of drones at energy or civilian infrastructure. The launch of new waves of medium-range ballistic missiles is also possible.
I think that they will continue to use drones just as they have been. Why do they mostly use drones? Because their objective at the moment is to bleed our air defense system dry. Well, that's what I think.
The Daily Mail also quotes a British colonel who claims that the war could enter a nuclear phase. After all, Putin knows that nuclear retaliation would force Ukraine to surrender.
He is not the only politician in the Russian Federation who, I think, would advise him that it's not worth, after all, messing around with nuclear weapons, because the response would be severe and harsh. Believe me, neither Europe nor America will just stand by and watch. In response, they would face a very serious strike.
But who knows, maybe after Operation Web and the Crimean Bridge, something else awaits Russia.
God loves the Trinity. First there was Web, then the Crimean Bridge. I can tell you with great confidence that we have another ace up our sleeve. We have our own little rocket that's even more interesting than Oreshnik. I think we'll be testing it ourselves very soon, given the situation that's unfolding on the part of the Russian Federation.
And despite the fact that since the beginning of this year, Russia has lost approximately 200,000 soldiers, Europe has also begun actively preparing for the arrival of the Russian world. The United Kingdom has announced a state of readiness for war.
We were told to sleep. I can announce that we are planning to build at least 6 new ammunition factories in the United Kingdom. In this way, we will create more than 1,000 jobs. We will produce 1,000 new long-range guns in the United Kingdom to strengthen Europe's deterrence forces.
NATO has also called on its European members to increase the number of air defense systems fivefold due to the threat of Russian aggression. But does Russia have the courage to take such a step?
I think it won't have enough strength and resources to do that. I understand that Europe realizes this as well. I understand that as of today, by the way, when Putin announced this renewed mobilization and these large-scale exercises on the territory of Belarus, Europe actually started taking Putin's threats much more seriously after that. And preparations on the territory of the European Union across Europe are being taken very seriously for defensive and preventive measures.
Also, according to Deep State, which has updated its data, the occupiers have advanced in the Sumy region, capturing Andrivka and Vodolagi.
The alarm signal is already on the air. The Doomsday Radio has started broadcasting again after the talks in Istanbul. The ominous Soviet radio wave, which had been silent for years, has come alive once more. And this is not just a coincidence. Experts are convinced the Russian Federation is preparing for an escalation. Find out exactly what is coming in this episode. This could be the beginning of something truly terrifying.
The so-called Doomsday Radio started broadcasting again right after the talks in Istanbul, sending out strange but alarming sounds. During the period of the so-called special military operation, this is not the first time that this mysterious Soviet-era radio wave has suddenly come to life. So what should we expect this time? Watch right now.
Maria, Dmitry, Shenya, and Boris.
The Doomsday Radio has started broadcasting again. The radio station went on air immediately after the negotiations in Istanbul. All of this was done to transmit a new coded message. 2 messages and 2 words, IBA base and ISA base. Later, at around 5:30, the radio station came to life again and broadcast the words Arapa Blitz. All of this is also accompanied by numbers. So far, no one has been able to decipher this code. But interestingly, the radio often starts broadcasting before or after important events.
The activity of this radio station transmitting coded words was noted before the start of the large-scale invasion. In connection with the conversation between the president of the Russian Federation and Trump, now this station went on air after the negotiations in Istanbul ended.
The official name of the Doomsday Radio is the Russian radio station UVB-76. It is also called the buzzer. That's because most of the time the station only transmits a buzzing sound. It is broadcast about 25 times per minute. But sometimes the buzzing noise is interrupted and then encoded voice messages are transmitted. This radio station is shrouded in mystery. No one really even knows when it began broadcasting. It is only assumed that this happened in 1975. And since then, its operation has never stopped. The broadcast runs around the clock.
What exactly it is remains unknown to the general public. And I suspect that very few people actually know what it is at all. There are different theories. Some believe it's military communications, others think it's for intelligence services.
The function of this radio station is also unknown. A former Lithuanian Minister of Information Technology claimed that the purpose of the voice messages is to confirm that the operators at the receiving stations are on alert.
It should be noted that this is one of the indirect signs by which Russian military activity can be tracked, such as bringing either nuclear forces or the entire military to combat readiness, or as they say, a general alert, full readiness. But there is probably no reliable information at present about what exactly the signals from this station mean.
But why is UVB-76 called the Doomsday Radio? It's all because possibly this very station will be the one to announce the end of the world, or more precisely, to start it. It is believed that the radio station is connected to the Russian missile system perimeter, and in the event of losing contact with the top leadership, it will automatically trigger a nuclear counterstrike.
In other words, when everything is shut down, the command posts are destroyed, the missiles will launch on their own according to pre-programmed instructions. And according to some reports or assumptions, the signal to launch will be precisely the cessation of this radio station's broadcast.
So, if the transmission stops, that will be the signal to launch the nuclear warheads. That's exactly why messages from the Russian radio station are being monitored so closely. But it's entirely possible that this is simply a Russian information psychological operation. All of it is meant to intimidate Ukrainians, to create fear, panic, and chaos. As if to say, if the Doomsday Radio is active, then maybe a nuclear strike is being prepared. But such assumptions are most likely just made up. No one knows if there will be a nuclear strike except for the Russian sociopath dictator. If something like that happens, thinking about the radio will clearly be the last thing on anyone's mind. Although indeed, it's not impossible that this is a secret code used by the Russian military.
890, Zhenya, Anna.
The head of the Pentagon will miss the Ramstein meeting, and this will happen for the first time since the format was launched 3 years ago. According to the Associated Press, citing its sources, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who returned on Sunday from a national security conference in Singapore, will only arrive in Brussels on Wednesday evening. By that time, the meeting will already be over. Hegseth will also not participate in Ramstein via video link. As journalists note, this is the latest in a series of steps the U.S. has taken to distance itself from efforts to support Ukraine in the war.
The Ukrainian armed forces delivered a precise strike, destroying a Zupar 1M, an elite counter-battery radar system of which Russia has only a few. Now all of that is in ruins. New Ukrainian interceptor drones are entering the front lines, a true super weapon for aerial combat. Meanwhile, NATO is raising the stakes by expanding its military budget. And in response to the growing threat from Russia, a contact group on Ukraine's defense is being urgently convened. Things are heating up. All the details are in this episode. The Russians didn't have many of them to begin with, and now they have even fewer. A rare Zupar 1M system worth $25 million has been destroyed at the front. The Ukrainian Defense Forces have delivered another precision strike against the Russian army, destroying one of its expensive and rare reconnaissance systems. We're talking about the Zupar 1M artillery reconnaissance and fire control system, which is estimated to cost around $25 million. The target was detected thanks to the coordinated work of the artillery reconnaissance, which quickly determined the coordinates and directed the strike assets. As a result, the system was completely destroyed, which will significantly weaken the occupiers' ability to detect Ukrainian positions and adjust their artillery. The loss of such equipment is a significant blow since the Russian army has very few of these systems and their production is complex and expensive. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian army has officially adopted the new Chief 1 drone for aerial combat. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine has officially approved the use of the new domestic unmanned aerial system Chief 1 in the armed forces of Ukraine. The device has passed codification and is already being delivered to the troops. Chief 1 is designed to intercept enemy drones and engage enemy personnel. It is equipped with a shot module capable of firing in both manual and automatic modes. Thanks to its lightweight and durable frame, powerful engines, and high maneuverability, the drone is especially effective in aerial duels. The design incorporates systems for automatic target recognition and calculation of the optimal engagement distance. Chief 1 effectively destroys enemy FPV drones, bombers, reconnaissance drones, and spotters, strengthening anti-drone defenses on the front line. The emergence of such developments demonstrates the rapid advancement of Ukrainian technologies in wartime conditions and the ability of the armed forces of Ukraine to effectively respond to aerial threats. Ukraine has struck at Russia's strategic aviation, which was used to attack the civilian population. Ukrainian forces carried out a large-scale special operation, simultaneously striking 4 military airfields on Russian territory where enemy strategic aviation was based. These aircraft were used to launch missile strikes on Ukrainian cities and the civilian population. The operation, called Web, became a unique example of a deep strike against the enemy's critical infrastructure. Strikes were carried out on the Beloye, Diaghilevo, Olenia, and Ivanovo airfields. Thanks to coordinated and synchronized actions, the largest number of aircraft was destroyed in a single operation. This dealt significant damage to Russian strategic aviation, which has been systematically used for terror. The operation became evidence of the high precision, scale, and effectiveness of Ukrainian forces' actions, even deep behind enemy lines. Meanwhile, NATO defense ministers are preparing a decision to strengthen the alliance's defense. The focus is on air defense, missiles, and expenditures. On June 5th, a key meeting of NATO defense ministers will take place in Brussels, where strategic steps to enhance the alliance's defense capabilities will be approved. At the center of the discussions are the development of air and missile defense systems, long-range weaponry, logistics, and mobile ground forces. It is expected that member states will significantly increase defense spending not only to the recommended 2% of GDP, but even higher. Special attention is being given to expanding defense production to meet the growing demand for weapons and equipment. Among the priorities are the creation of a resilient supply system and ensuring that troops have everything necessary to accomplish their missions. The issue of defense investments will be central at the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague. Additionally, against the backdrop of threats from Russia, international terrorism, and global instability, the alliance is demonstrating its determination to act swiftly and systematically. On the eve of the summit, on June 4th, a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in the Ramstein format will take place in Brussels. And that's all for today. Tune in tomorrow for more news.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Trump struck. The Kremlin is in shock. New American sanctions are already prepared, and they could become a real disaster for the Russian economy. While Moscow is creating the illusion of peace through Istanbul, the US is preparing a sanctions knockout. We'll tell you right now why this particular package could destroy the Kremlin's economy. All the details are in this episode.
The Kremlin has no intention of using the negotiations in Istanbul to end the war.
Of course, it would be wrong to expect any immediate decisions or breakthroughs here. Wrong. But the work is ongoing. Certain agreements were reached in Istanbul, and they are important.
Russian officials are now openly stating that they are simply buying time in this way to inflict as much damage on Ukraine as possible.
The negotiations in Istanbul are not meant for a compromise peace based on someone's unrealistic conditions, but for our swift victory and the complete destruction of the neo-Nazi government. That is the meaning of the Russian memorandum that was published yesterday.
Basically, Russia does not set itself the goal of reaching any kind of compromise. Russia's objective is to prolong the war. Russia's goal is to keep throwing up a smokescreen, even for Trump himself, in order to stay in the discourse, while at the same time using the other hand to carry out terrorist acts and attempt to seize Ukrainian territory.
Meanwhile, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan stated that the parties have agreed to hold a new round of negotiations, but the date has not yet been announced. Meanwhile, the president of Turkey is anticipating a meeting at the presidential level.
My greatest wish is to organize a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky in Istanbul. I also do not rule out inviting US President Donald Trump. I want to take part in this meeting as well, so that Istanbul becomes the center of peace.
The only one ignoring the meeting is Putin. After all, Zelensky and Trump have repeatedly confirmed their willingness to fly to Turkey. In addition, Trump is also interested in a personal meeting with Putin.
The president views the progress in the negotiations we are witnessing positively. He once again called on the two leaders to sit down and talk to each other directly. The president is open to participating in the meeting, if it comes to that.
In fact, Trump's connection with Putin, his strategic plans to divide the world and to revise global geopolitics, all of this is currently hindered precisely by Putin's unwillingness to engage in constructive dialogue on rather important issues of world order.
Interestingly, the US president disappeared from the information space after the successful SBU Operation Web. All statements are being made by his press secretary, and even then, they're very evasive.
The president does not want this war to drag on any longer than it already has. He sincerely wants the fighting to stop, for people to stop dying, and above all, he truly wants this issue to be resolved peacefully and definitively at the negotiating table, through open dialogue and mutual understanding.
It's obvious that for Trump, who is being shouted at from all sides that Putin is blatantly leading him by the nose, this story is finally starting to sink in. And since a new global strategy for Trump's behavior hasn't been devised yet, and this narrative in which the US will exist in the coming months hasn't been formulated, it's obvious that he has taken a public pause in order to avoid additional criticism and not attract more negativity.
Congress has turned out to be more radical in the current situation. According to Special Representative Kellogg, new devastating sanctions against Russia are already ready for a vote.
I spoke with Senator Lindsey Graham this past weekend, and I believe they are ready. They are called the Russia Sanctions Act of 2025, and I believe he has already prepared them and is ready to make them public. And they are quite burdensome. They include a 500% tariff on Russian oil products.
Given the circumstances and the fact that one of the co-authors of the bill is Lindsey Graham, the bill itself could not have appeared without, perhaps silent, but 100% approval from Trump himself. Globally today, there is no clear understanding within Trump's circle about what the next steps will be. Therefore, it is possible to assume that after another demarche from Russia, there will still be some attempt to toughen the policy towards Putin.
Perhaps the Russians' tactic of stalling for time has actually worked. They really do continue to wage war without any hint of peace. But there will definitely be consequences to such a tactic, and Putin probably won't like them.
Russia is pushing with all its might. The situation in Sumy region is tense. Russia is transferring more and more troops to the area, including assault brigades. They are attacking head-on, disregarding losses. The situation is heating up by the hour. In this video, we explain what's happening in the Sumy region.
Russia continues its offensive in the Sumy region. The occupiers are trying to break through certain sections of the front. According to statements by the spokesperson of the State Border Guard Service, Andriy Demchenko, the situation in the region is tense, especially along the borders of the Kotin and Yunakivka districts. However, there is no evidence of a large-scale offensive from the Russian side. The enemy is advancing in small assault groups, losing hundreds of soldiers daily in the process, including due to the Ukrainian armed forces' maintained foothold in the Kursk region.
The enemy is trying by any means to push us out of Russian territory, but we have good operational positions, and most importantly, we are using them to destroy large enemy forces. And it is very important to note that these are professional forces. As a rule, in other sectors, the majority are conscripts, in other words, what we call cannon fodder, but here, it's airborne troops, naval infantry, air assault units, parachute regiments, in other words, those who have been trained for a long time to carry out such operations.
Also, according to the military, the enemy, likely assessing its prospects, is hardly using armored vehicles at all in the Sumy direction. At most, the command is deploying light motor vehicles. This allows for somewhat faster movement across open terrain, but it does not have a decisive impact.
The Russians continue their strategic offensive operation. And when analysts talk about whether the enemy's advance has increased or decreased, it has increased. What is this due to, in fact? In recent weeks, the Russians have achieved one such non-strategic but operational success. This is the breakthrough of our defenses by forces up to a division between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka, reaching the Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka highway.
However, having broken into our defenses, the Russian Federation is constantly subjected to flanking attacks, which allows us to effectively destroy the enemy and regularly replenish our exchange fund. For example, in the past 24 hours, the armed forces of Ukraine have repelled more than 50 assaults here.
I wouldn't call this a major offensive, but it is certainly enough to draw serious attention from the Ukrainian defense. The Russians have assembled what they call the Northern Group of Forces in this area. Essentially, they have moved in from the Kursk region.
To minimize civilian casualties, Ukraine was forced to announce an evacuation from the nearby border areas. The authorities explained to locals, this does not mean your home will be occupied, it just means it is becoming too dangerous there. At the moment, there are 213 such settlements.
We can now... Sit down. Sit down, come on, sit. Well, yeah.
By the way, Ukraine is disrupting the Russian offensive not only with actions at the front, but also behind enemy lines. Yesterday's sabotage of a railway bridge in the Kursk region and the derailment of a train in Donbass are proof of that.
So that the enemy doesn't let its guard down, under occupied Melitopol, Ukrainian Special Services, specifically the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, derailed a freight train carrying shells and ammunition. Strikes continue to be carried out. Over the past day, there were strikes on Lviv, strikes on the Kursk region of the Russian Federation, in order to prevent the enemy from regrouping, supporting their own logistics, delivering ammunition and personnel to continue offensive actions in the Sumy region.
At the same time, the bravado of Russian military correspondents about their troops advancing on Sumy looks completely absurd, according to experts. Despite minor successes in the Sumy region, the likely outcome of all these actions by the occupiers will be temporary control over a narrow strip of forest belts along the border.
Again, this is overall quite a slow, not very, how should I put it, consistent and not very well coordinated offensive. The point of which, as I understand it, is to carry out Putin's order and create in the Sumy region what he called a buffer zone.
The Ukrainian side is also predicting that the Russians will not be able to reach Sumy. Currently, there is an enemy grouping of about 50,000 people in this direction. And for such grand plans, these forces are clearly insufficient.
The harsh daily life of the heroes of the special military operation. The statistics are blunt. Veterans can't find jobs and many simply don't want to. Apparently, looting was easier than working. As for what the mobilized murderers and rapists from prisons are up to, that's a rhetorical question, as they say. Details about the lives of Special Military Operation veterans in this episode.
Here. Just like that, almost every second hero of the Special Military Operation who returned home did not get a job. This was reported by Russian Deputy Prime Minister Tatyana Golikova.
As of May 1st, 2025, currently 57% of demobilized participants of the Special Military Operation are gainfully employed in various sectors. Most of them, 80%, work under a formal employment contract. The rest are either self-employed, individual entrepreneurs, or combine several types of work.
Of course, the government has taken care of the war participants and developed a plan that will not only help them find jobs, but also improve their skills and competencies, and even acquire a new profession.
So first and foremost, they need psychological rehabilitation. In other words, they need to get their head straight. And naturally, if people keep telling them what a great job they've done as killers, oh, you're just a sweetheart, let us kiss your butt. Well, that's not going to improve the situation at all. In fact, it will only make things worse, because people with that kind of experience, when they come back, realize that if something doesn't suit them, it's easier for them to just grab a knife and stab someone than to, learn something new or get a new job.
But the genius of the Russian Federation doesn't end there. Earlier, it became known that the administrations of Russian regions received instructions from the Kremlin to prepare between 30 and 60 war participants each year for employment in government service. Yeah, sure, let's just give former convicts government jobs now.
Somewhere, where it's not dangerous. After all, a military registration and enlistment office employee is also a civil service. Or, I don't know, maybe a school security guard or something. It's another matter that they're also trying to push some of them into becoming deputies or other kinds of bosses, but again, just for show.
But something tells me that only a select few will actually make it into that number.
Using stand-ins is the simplest way to do it. We remember that at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, it was Prigozhin who handled this. He would enroll some officials into Wagner, then give them the necessary documents so they could use them. Now, there are other similar units. I think it's called bars.
But the problem isn't even with the companies and employers, it's with the people Russia is recruiting for the front.
When Putin was rounding everyone up for the war, he was taking people from the most, marginalized segments of society, that is, those who really didn't have a decent job in their regions. People who were drinking themselves into oblivion because they had no future. And in fact, it was exactly these people who went to fight for money. But we all understand perfectly well that if things were bad for them before, things will get even worse for them afterwards.
As a result, in the Samara region and earlier in Moscow, a law was passed establishing job quotas for veterans of the Special Military Operation. In short, companies with more than 100 employees are required to allocate 1% of their positions for the employment of military personnel. But since April 2024, only 300 former servicemen have taken advantage of this option.
Of course, they are used to getting big money just for killing. So why would they want to earn little money for actually having to work? Yes, it's clear that war can also be called a job, but it's a completely different way of life. And that's why going somewhere to work for little money is just something they're not used to. For them, it's a psychological breakdown. That's why I say that before thinking about education, employment, or anything else, we first need to consider how to help them overcome post-traumatic syndrome.
And still, if the Russian government is so eager to help its special military operation veterans, are they really doing enough? Or, as always, are they just pretending?
They just do it to check a box for PR to show that they're doing something. It's all to please Putin, to please Kirienko, and so on and so forth. Of course, no one is actually concerned about any of this. In the end, they're simply afraid of them. And the main desire of the authorities who support this is simply to get rid of them so that they get killed in the war and never come back to Russia.
Of course, and you can understand the employers too. They're not exactly eager to hire former soldiers with criminal records, even if those records have been cleared because of their participation in combat. But that's not the only consequence for Russian citizens.
This means outside of any quotas, regardless of grades, they and their children are admitted to higher education institutions. What will this lead to? Well, okay, we already know about the catastrophic decline in the level of education in Russia, but it's going to get even worse. And ordinary children, even talented ones, simply won't be able to get state-funded spots because all the places will be taken by military personnel and their children.
The government seems to be doing something, launching programs, talking about support, but it does so rather half-heartedly, as if without much enthusiasm. Although, everyone already understands that it's much easier to just send a SVO veteran back to the front, only this time for good.
That's all for today. Subscribe to channel, like video and leave your comments, and catch other news in the next episode of Hotspot.